Hello, today I'll be talking about preventing and reducing vertebrate pest damage to fruits and vegetable crops. The damage caused to crops by birds and mammals can lead to reduced yields and reduction of crop quality. So this presentation will present options, management options, and strategies to reduce this type of damage. Learning objectives for this session are to understand wildlife nuisance management options, understanding legal implications of management, learning some characteristics of common mammal species which can cause damage, and understanding the concept of integrated pest management as it relates to nuisance wildlife management. Crops should be scouted for damage just as you would scout for insects, weeds, and disease. It can be challenging to identify what animal is causing the damage because the animal has often damaged the crop and left the area. Many species such as raccoon are nocturnal or active at night, causing damage when we're not out in the field. Therefore, you're going to have to closely examine the crop looking for damage. If damage is being caused year-round, the cost of control may be warranted. Seasonal damage may stop on its own as wildlife move to other crops or foods in the area. Seasonal damage can be anticipated from year to year, and management strategies should be put in place prior to the occurrence of seasonal damage. For example, raccoon or deer damage to sweet corn. Control techniques are limited to behavior management with a few exceptions, so let's take a look at options available to you. Strategies to manage wildlife damage fall into 5 categories: population reduction, modification of the habitat, exclusion, repellents, and frightening devices. Toxicants are also available for some species, but primarily rodents. The rodenticide has to be labeled for that particular species and are not generally available for larger mammalian vertebrates. Avicides are also available to manage a limited number of bird species that I'll talk about later in this presentation. Keep in mind that any one strategy is likely not to solve your problem. You'll need to approach vertebrate pest management through an integrated approach as we do with insects, diseases, and weeds. Let's take a look at population reduction as our first management strategy. Wildlife are protected by state and federal laws. Therefore, the first step in using this strategy is to obtain a wildlife nuisance permit. These permits are available through your local wildlife biologist with the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Wildlife biologists cover multiple counties, so to find the biologist responsible for your county, use the University of Illinois Extension's Living with Wildlife in Illinois website. On this website, you'll be able to search for a professional biologist by a particular county. These permits are free of charge and must be obtained even if you want to live trap an animal and move it off your farm unharmed. If you'd rather hire someone to assist you with this trapping and removal of animals, a list of licensed wildlife nuisance trappers can also be found at the previously mentioned website. Many people think that because the animal is causing damage on private property, they don't need a permit, but this is not the case. So obtain a permit to trap and remove wildlife from your farm. Currently, you don't need a nuisance wildlife permit to reduce populations of small rodents such as mice, voles, 13-line ground squirrels, moles, and chipmunks on your property. Population management can also be done during the Illinois hunting or trapping season, which is established each year by the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Of course, this kind of seasonal hunting or trapping can only be done on rural or other property which is not subject to local ordinances which restrict this type of activity. The use of a toxicant generally is not a management option except for small rodent species such as mice and voles, where an appropriate rodenticide can be used. Make sure you read and follow the label, as many toxicants are toxic to other mammal species. It also needs to be labeled specifically for the mammal you're trying to control. Population reduction through the live capture and release of animals has some limitations, but may be the only solution for problem animals, defined as those that are denned under or living inside a house or outbuilding. Otherwise, the removal of a few animals from your farm is considered to be a short-term fix to the problem because of immigration of other animals of the same species from adjacent habitat. The wildlife management concept called carrying capacity may help you understand this movement of animals looking for food, water, and shelter, components of habitat. Carrying capacity is defined as the number of animals of a particular species that can be supported by available habitat. So when animals are removed from an area, it makes available resources that can support additional animals, and immigration occurs and the void is quickly filled. Another problem with trapping and moving wildlife to a new home is the release of that animal into habitat that may already be at carrying capacity, and competition and probably death may occur. In addition, it's illegal to release the animal on public property. The animal must be released on private property with permission of the landowner. Your permit for wildlife nuisance trapping will indicate how that animal can be released, or if it can be released. Trapping and removing animals can be very time consuming, and it also can be quite expensive, especially if you hire a nuisance wildlife trapper licensed by the state of Illinois. You may expect to pay $50 to $100 per animal removed. Many of the wildlife species that cause conflicts for fruit and vegetable growers are game species in Illinois. One strategy to reduce the population of wildlife on your farm is to harvest animals during the hunting and trapping season. If your family doesn't participate in these activities, you may consider offering this opportunity to friends or others in your community. Hunting and trapping can reduce the population to levels more sustainable to their natural food resources, which may help reduce damage to your crop. Hunting also changes the behavior of wildlife by causing animals to avoid portions of your farm. So it's a great tool that can be incorporated into your integrated pest management program. Reducing the available habitat for a particular species is the second management tool. Unfortunately, as a vegetable or fruit grower, you are increasing the available food resources within the home range of both herbivores and omnivores. However, by knowing the habitat needs of a particular species of wildlife, you may be able to reduce another component of their habitat. For example, rabbits may be attracted to vegetable crop fields, but without adequate escape cover, such as rows of shrubs or tall grass areas, rabbits may seek higher quality habitat with both food and escape cover available. By removing brush piles, tall grass areas, or other permanently vegetated areas adjacent to crop fields, crop damage may be reduced. Exclusion is a very effective tool to reduce wildlife damage to crops. However, it is expensive and therefore has to be considered a long-term investment. In most cases, fencing is used to keep wildlife out of a crop area, but sometimes is used to individually protect trees. The upper right picture in this slide shows wire fencing used to protect trees from beaver damage near a pond, and the lower picture shows a welded wire fence that's being used as a barrier to keep white-tailed deer out of this orchard area. Although repellents have some limitations, their effectiveness can be increased when used in conjunction with other nuisance wildlife management strategies. Repellents are regulated as a pesticide, so it's important to read and follow the label carefully, as we do with all pesticides. There are three types of repellents based on how they work to repel wildlife. Taste repellents are used primarily on ornamental plantings and fruit trees during the dormant season to reduce damage. Area repellents are used to create a barrier around the crop field, or sometimes within the crop field. The third group or type of repellent is the tactile group. This is primarily used to reduce bird roosting in outbuildings. It's a sticky, tactile type of repellent used on the beams or rafters of buildings. Repellents have limitations. Most cannot be applied to vegetable crops and must be reapplied after heavy rains. The overall effectiveness of a repellent can be influenced by factors such as the availability of alternative untreated food sources and the density of the local wildlife population.
Repellents have been shown to be effective in research trials at rates of 55 to 85%. Therefore, they should be considered a tool that can be used to reduce the damage, or as a technique to be used in combination with other techniques in your IPM plan. Because repellents are more effective for short periods of time, they can be used to reduce the damage when yields can be impacted during a specific time period. For example, deer can impact sweet corn yields through silk clipping during pollination, so area repellents can be used in conjunction with other techniques to keep deer out until pollination has occurred. In general, frightening devices and techniques have shown to be ineffective or have limited effectiveness when used alone. Visual frightening devices such as inflatable balloons, plastic snakes, and similar devices have little effect because wildlife quickly learn that there is no real threat to their safety. Visual devices that offer movement, such as strips of mylar ribbon hanging above the crop and move frequently, can have better results, but are still considered to be short-term remedies. Sound-producing devices, such as a propane-fired cannon, have also been evaluated and are considered short-term techniques because the animals get accustomed to that sound. Their effectiveness can, however, be increased when moved to different parts of the field and that cannon fired on a variable pattern. These techniques are most useful when attempting to keep damage from occurring during a short period of time, similar to the repellents that we talked about used in sweet corn fields.
We've taken a look at some management strategies in general. Let's turn our attention to looking at some common animals that can impact vegetable and fruit production. Eastern cottontail rabbits can cause damage to both vegetables as they're getting established, as well and to woody plantings in our orchard during the winter months. Because rabbits' home range is small, about 10 acres, a locally large population of rabbits can cause extensive damage. They have a high reproductive rate, but being at the bottom of the food chain, their average lifespan is only about a year.
Exclusion is a technique that can be effective for reducing damage from rabbits. However, it can be expensive when protecting large crop areas. Fencing must have openings that are 1 inch in diameter or smaller and be at least 2 feet tall. It needs to be installed tight to the ground or buried 2 to 3 inches into the ground. When fencing is used to protect woody plants during the winter, you need to consider areas that snow might drift over that fence and make it ineffective. Young, thin bark trees in an orchard can be protected with a cylinder of hardware cloth. Openings in the hardware cloth should be 1/4 inch in diameter or smaller, which would also deter mice. The cylinder should be installed tight to the ground and stand 2 to 3 inches away from the trunk of the tree.
There are several taste repellents that are labeled for use on woody plants and ornamentals for rabbits, but none of those can be used on vegetable crops. Many of these repellents have as the active ingredient theorem, which is a fungicide. Remember to read and follow the labeled instructions on all repellents when attempting to reduce damage from rabbits or any other species. Also remember that some repellents must be reapplied frequently, such as after heavy rainfall, so check the label. Because rabbits have a small home range, habitat modification can reduce damage by keeping escape cover and preferred habitat away from crop fields and orchards. Rabbits prefer tall grass, shrubs, and brushy areas because these areas offer protection from predation. Mowing vegetation surrounding the crop field and within orchards can reduce these preferred escape cover areas. When you're pruning your fruit trees, don't leave piles of branches within the orchard, and pick up dropped fruit to reduce food supplies within the orchard. Habitat modification as a technique may not eliminate the damage, but it can help make other combined techniques in your integrated pest management program for wildlife more effective. Statewide, the rabbit population decreased slightly in 2013, following a little bit of a downward trend statewide over the past several years. But the population is increasing slightly in northern and southern Illinois. Rabbit populations can also increase or decrease dramatically in local areas because of that small home range that we mentioned earlier. If rabbits are to be removed from an area through trapping, remember a nuisance wildlife permit is going to be required. A reduction of urban populations through nuisance trapping can be an effective tool in reducing local populations during the winter. However, trapping and hunting of rabbits may not reduce the population for the following cropping season, because individuals are going to move into the available habitat, like we talked about earlier in the concept of carrying capacity. In areas where firearms can be discharged, rabbits may be hunted in season with a valid Illinois hunting license. Let's talk about deer for a minute. White-tailed deer can impact, again, both fruit and vegetable yields from browsing as well as from antler rubbing in the fall or winter. Their home range is much larger than rabbits, so managing their behavior is a little more challenging because the animals may spend time on adjacent lands to your farm. Deer are another important game species in Illinois, with multiple hunting seasons available to licensed hunters each year in Illinois. The fawns are going to stay with the doe for almost a year, so as does herd up with each other later in the winter, they create large groups of animals that may visit your orchard as part of their home range and cause potential extensive damage to your orchard during the winter time. Deer don't have upper incisors, so their browsing damage appears as torn branch or leaf edges rather than a clean cut like rabbit damage. Antler rubbing occurs beginning in September through the fall and early winter. This damage appears as shredded or torn bark and often broken branches, as in the picture in the bottom left. Deer sometimes also damage watermelon, cantaloupe, and pumpkin crops with their hooves as they break open fruit to consume the more palatable inner portions of the fruit. This damage can, of course, be identified by the scrape marks on the fruit left by the two toes of their hooves. Antler rubbing can be an extensive problem in orchards as we're trying to get trees established. This rubbing can remove bark and cambium on thin bark trees, causing the death of the tree through girdling. Therefore, young trees and thin bark trees should be protected within the home range of deer with either individual protection or an area fence. Make sure the protection is in place by early fall. Probably September 1 is a good target date. There are several commercial tree protectors available, trade names such as Vexar and Tubex. Make sure that when you're using a plastic tube or a homemade wire cylinder around the tree trunk, remember to install these cylinders tight to the ground to reduce the risk of voles getting inside the protector that will in turn eat the inner bark of the tree and girdle it, causing similar damage as antler rubbing. In this picture, this particular tree was protected using wooden lath material, taking 3 lath and wrapping duct tape to hold it in place. This type of protection doesn't allow any kind of protected area for voles to get inside and consume that inner bark anyway. When individual tree protection is not not practical for you, fencing the deer from the orchard or the crop fields is another option. Fencing, remember, is an investment that will have to be recouped over the lifetime of the fence. The fence in this slide is a design that can be effective for smaller fields and when deer populations are low. One strand of electric fence is used with an aluminum foil covered with peanut butter. These tabs are attached or taped to the fence, and then the deer smell the peanut butter or touch the electrified tabs, scaring the animal, and therefore you're really training the deer to stay out of the field. This design is also used sometimes as a temporary fence design to keep deer out of sweet corn fields during pollination or melons during harvest. Remember that the electric fence charger should be one that's designed to deliver a higher electrical charge, specifically designed for wildlife populations. In the case of deer, they have smaller points of contact with the ground than domestic livestock. So if you're going to use electric chargers to exclude wildlife, make sure again that they are designed for wildlife, specifically deer. With a one-strand fence design, visibility to the deer can be an issue. If they run into the fence, that one strand is likely to be knocked down or broken, and the system obviously compromised. Polytape type electrical fencing material, like in the picture, can be used to increase the visibility. There should also be a clear area outside the fence so that deer have a chance to take a look at and see that obstruction. This area should be at least 6 to 12 feet in width. This particular design and all electric fence designs should be electrified immediately after construction, because remember, it's a behavior modification fence, not a true physical barrier. So the first time that animal comes in contact with it, it needs to be startled or scared and trained not to enter into the crop field.
There are several deer fence designs available for your reference on the University of Illinois Extension Living with Wildlife in Illinois website. Regardless of the design, electric fences need to be charged with a unit that is designed for wildlife, as deer have smaller hooves points of contact than other species, but has more power. Fences should also be electrified immediately after construction, even if you only partially finish the fence construction. So charge that fence up so that it is charged overnight, first time the deer come in contact with it. Many of the fence designs are still training devices to keep the deer from going under or through that fence. In this slide, you see an offset fence, electric fence design used to keep deer out of the crop area, which is on the left of the slide. Deer approach the fence from the right, and at 6 feet tall, the deer could easily jump over this fence. However, deer will try to go through or under an obstacle prior to attempting to jump over it. It's less risky for that deer to do that rather than jump over it. Each one of these wires is electrified, and this trains the deer to avoid the area, the obstacle, and the crop it's protecting. In this slide, you see another picture of that offset deer fence design. You can notice on the left side, which is the outside of the fence in this slide, there is a very large expanse clear area from the woods up to that fence. So you want deer to approach your fence regardless of the design at a walk rather than a run. This prevents an accidental collision where the deer would just go right through those couple of strands of electric fence. So it increases the visibility. And again, you want deer to approach your fence, irregardless of the design, at a walk. When doing research for deer fencing, you might notice that a new material made out of netting is available. It comes in widths of 10 to 12 feet. The new material is actually very difficult for the deer to see, so you need to use some techniques to increase the visibility. Those techniques might include adding mylar tape or plastic flagging to that fence so that the deer don't have again an unexpected collision with that fence. Make sure again you leave an open area on the outside of that fence so that the deer are approaching that fence at a walk. Taste repellents for deer work similar to the way a contact type of pesticide works, meaning that they only protect the portion of the plant the repellent comes in contact with. Therefore, the use of taste repellents works much better during the dormant season on woody plants when the growth isn't expanding. Taste repellents also may not be labeled for use on fruit trees after fruit set. Make sure you check and follow the label when you're using any kind of a taste repellent. If the product you choose doesn't already have an anti-transparent in the mixture, one should be used, such as VaporGuard. It's going to extend the time period that product is going to stay on the plant. So again, check the label. There are research results and cost comparisons on the Living with Wildlife in Illinois University of Extension website under the category of white-tailed deer management. Another type of repellent is referred to as an area or odor repellent. Area repellents work by causing the deer to be afraid of the area because of the odor. Odor produced smells very similar to that of a predator. Edible animal protein sold as by the trade name Plant Skid and another active ingredient, ammonium soaps of fatty acids, have had fair to good results in reducing damage from browsing. Ammonium soaps of fatty acids sold as under the trade name Hinder actually is the only taste repellent or area repellent that is labeled for use on a few vegetable crops, which include sweet corn. Some research has shown that Hinder was only effective for 2 to 3 weeks, which may be enough time to reduce silk clipping activity and improve pollination in sweet corn. As mentioned earlier, repellents are better suited for dormant tree protection. Research trials have demonstrated that at best, browsing damage is going to be reduced, not eliminated. As with all repellents, the effectiveness may be also reduced by high deer populations on your farm. And if the deer don't have an alternate untreated food supply, the deer may ignore the repellent and eat the treated plants. In addition, there are some individual deer that will ignore the repellent even when other food resources are abundant. Deer are an important game species in Illinois. There are many hunting seasons available to reduce the population through recreational hunting. Hunting activities also alter the deer's behavior in that they will disperse to adjacent property within their home range. Remember that the home range of white-tailed deer is 1 to 3 square miles in size. If the population reduction is a goal, removal of does and adjacent landowner cooperation will help accomplish the goal of population reduction. Nuisance wildlife permits are different for white-tailed deer compared to other mammals. The deer removal permit is required, and the Illinois Department of Natural Resources wildlife biologist will come to your farm to assess the damage caused by deer prior to the issuance of a permit. Habitat modification is a relatively new technique being used to manage white-tailed deer damage. Some practices that are being used include leaving open vegetated areas between crop fields and woodland edges, as well as planting food plots in these areas. Both of the strategies offer alternative food sources for white-tailed deer, and they may make using repellents more effective. In winter months, when food supplies are covered with snow, alternative woody browse in adjacent woodlands can take the pressure off of damage to fruit trees and orchards. Therefore, timber harvesting techniques which encourage reproductive growth, such as group selection harvesting or small parcel clear-cutting, may be incorporated into whole farm management plans when possible. Let's talk about voles. Some people know them as meadow mice or field mice. They have a shorter tail and stockier body than house mice. They are a tall grass habitat animal, and they will use surface runways and underground tunnels and burrows. Voles are active all day long and will reproduce year-round, therefore making the population somewhat cyclic. There are 3 species of voles in Illinois that we might see causing damage to crops. The 3 species of voles look very similar, and identification often has to be done with the animal in hand. The importance of identification is related to the selection of the best rodenticide for control. Pine vole damage in an orchard can be hidden from view, remaining unnoticed until the death of the fruit tree seedling, because they eat the inner bark of the roots in the cambium, which can girdle it and kill the tree. Therefore, monitoring for voles in your orchard is a very important task in your integrated pest management plan. One way to monitor or scout for voles is to use what has been referred to as the apple sign test. Half of a shingle can be used to make a monitoring station by placing it on the ground, slightly arched upward. 30 stations are placed per acre as described on this slide. The stations are left unbaited for 5 days, then a small piece of apple is placed under each shingle, and then the apple is checked 24 hours later, looking for signs of consumption by a vole. As you're checking apple slices for tooth marks or part of that apple being consumed, count the number of apples pieces with chew marks. A percentage of potential damage can be estimated from the percentage of chewed apple pieces. This test should be done in the fall and again in the spring to monitor the population. It also should be done 21 to 30 days after the application of a rodenticide, just to see the effectiveness of your control measure. If you determine that vole populations are high in your orchard, they can be reduced using a toxicant or rodenticide. No nuisance permit is required. A rodenticide with the active ingredient zinc phosphide is more effective against meadow and prairie voles, while products with the active ingredient chlorofascinone are more effective against pine voles. So knowing which species of vole you're dealing with is an important step in reducing the population through the correct selection of rodenticide. While all rodenticides have some level of toxicity to other species of wildlife, zinc phosphide has high toxicity. Therefore, it's recommended that you use an enclosed bait station when you're using zinc phosphide on your property. When you read the label on zinc phosphide, it does indicate that it can be broadcast applied into vegetated areas or used in a bait station. Remember that when you're reducing meadow and prairie vole populations using zinc phosphide, the voles will learn to avoid it if you leave it in the bait stations continuously. So if the populations are high through your monitoring in the fall, use a zinc phosphide treatment to knock back the population, then switch to a product containing chlorofascinone to reduce the potential for bait shyness if you're going to leave that product in a bait station all winter. There are some non-chemical practices that can help manage vole populations. Habitat modification or management can reduce the vole population. An example of habitat modification is mowing. Remember that they are a tall grass habitat animal, so if you're mowing the orchard throughout the season, but especially in the fall, is going to reduce that protective habitat cover. Remember that again, they're going to breed year-round, if you can't, you can also remove the vegetation out to the drip line around each fruit tree. Especially want to do this if you have pine voles in your orchard. You can also mow adjacent areas to the orchard or crop field to reduce the connected vole habitat to these parts of your farm. Some people use predator perches, and they can be installed to encourage the American kestrel and red-tailed hawk to use your farm as hunting grounds to consume some of the voles. Predation can help reduce the population in areas that, when you have really high populations of voles, don't have the expectation that they're going to remove all the voles in your orchard. But it certainly can be a part of an integrated pest management plan to manage voles. Let's talk about raccoons for a minute. They're classified as a fur bearer, and we have a trapping season and a hunting season here in Illinois. They're very adaptable, living in all types of habitat areas, including urban and small farm areas. Raccoons have a very large home range, with males using an area that might be 3 to 20 square miles in size, and females using a little bit smaller area, being 1 to 6 square miles in size. The young stay with the females for the first year of their life, learning how to find food and avoid danger. So in mid to late summer, the raccoon family may visit your crop field foraging, learning how to forage for food. If you have problems with raccoons in crop areas, exclusion using some type of fencing is going to be the most effective control method to reduce damage. Electric fencing is one technique. The one electric fence wire needs to be 6 inches off the ground. It's more effective if you add a double wire or a second wire that's again 6 inches above the first wire. Fence chargers can be put on timers to turn on at dusk and off at sunrise, as raccoon activity is pretty much nocturnal. Fencing should be installed and charged prior to anticipated damage on sweet corn and melons. So again, raccoons are going to visit that crop probably a little bit before, maybe a week or so before that crop is ready to harvest. So start monitoring for that activity, or just assume that if you've had problems in the past, you're going to have problems this year. So get that fence installed and ready to get charged up during the harvest season. Raccoons will den in buildings or under buildings on your farm. They're great climbers, so inspect buildings for holes or damaged areas and make repairs to reduce access. Anticipate damage. Good maintenance. Picture in this slide shows how electric fencing can be used to prevent access underneath the building if you can't make a permanent repair. If an individual does den up or move into a building, it will have to be trapped. It'll make a lot of efforts to stay in that building. And it'll have to be removed. Again, remember, you need a nuisance wildlife permit to remove it, or hire a licensed nuisance trapper. Raccoons in Illinois must be euthanized or released on your own property. And remember that large home range that raccoons have. So even if you had owned several thousand acres, that raccoon would likely end up back on your property. So begin monitoring, prevent or reduce the opportunity for them to get in a building is going to help reduce the future problems with denning up in a building that and required trapping. In this slide, showing some damage from raccoons as they've gained access to the building. They're very strong animals and will cause additional damage, enlarging that hole that might already be existing to create a den inside that. Remember again, these animals in these particular slides that are in the building would have to be trapped and removed. They're going to be very persistent about returning. And then building repair could be made after the problem animal is removed. Other techniques to reduce crop damage from raccoons are limited, as there are no toxicants, repellents, or fumigants that are registered for use on raccoons. Although there are a number of home remedies that you might hear about, from frightening raccoons out of your sweet corn field or other crop areas. These frightening techniques are very short-lived, and the animals ignore them and proceed to consume your crops. Groundhogs, or they're also referred to as woodchucks, are in the squirrel family and are excellent diggers. They prefer open farmland areas that have adjacent wooded habitats, so the typical small farm and orchard are perfect habitat areas. Groundhogs are also excellent at climbing trees, making them a challenge to fence out of an area. You have to require a woven wire fence as well as electric fence on the outside of that on an outrigger. They really don't have a very large home range and may only move 50 to 150 feet from their den if adequate food is available. In Illinois, groundhog are a game species, and therefore they can be hunted in season to reduce the wildlife population in those areas that firearms can be used. Trapping and removal, as well as a fumigant gas cartridge, requires a nuisance wildlife damage permit. Fencing a crop field or an orchard, again, requires the use of an electric fence or that woven wire electric fence combination. Remember never to use a fumigant if the burrow is adjacent to a building because the potential harm to humans or livestock, as well as the danger of fire underneath that building. Remember, the fumigant that's used is a carbon monoxide cartridge, which is ignited, producing both carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide to suffocate the groundhog. So let's talk about bird damage for a minute. Damage can occur from birds entering packing and wash houses and potentially contaminating boxes, equipment, and product. There are some species of birds that are also attracted to fruits, especially damaged small fruits like blueberries, cherries. All species of birds are protected by state and federal law, with the exception of 3 species that aren't native to the United States, and that's European sterling, English sparrow, and pigeons. These are the 3 species that will go into a building to nest and also feed on grain and livestock areas. You can hire a licensed commercial applicator with an avicide category on his license to come in and administer and use that avicide in a building. The deal with birds consuming small fruits, there are some sound producing devices and other frightening devices on the market. There are recordings of birds in distress. Some producers have reported pretty good success in reducing the damage. Remember that, again, with all of our IPM strategies, exclusion of the birds from small fruits is a more reliable method to reduce the damage, just like fencing. So mesh netting can be used to exclude the birds. Make sure you install that prior to the birds feeding on the crop to improve your success. The netting must also be on a support system that keeps the netting off of the fruit, tree, or vine that's producing that fruit, to reduce the consumption of fruit through the netting by the bird on the outside. You may see this kind of damage in the picture from time to time on trees. The yellow-bellied sapsucker creates its own feeding station on through the bark of the tree by pecking rows of holes, horizontal or vertical holes through the outer bark. This habit generally doesn't kill a tree. In good health, those wounds are going to heal up, but what they do is they'll return and feed on the sap and insects. It will enlarge the holes from time to time, so it can cause some girdling or reduction in health of that tree over time. That's something you want to monitor. The recommendation in an urban area and in a tree in a landscape is to cover that damaged area with burlap or screen wire to discourage the bird. It is going to move to another tree in the landscape, so it's generally thought of in an orchard to allow the bird to continue to return to one apple tree rather than going down from tree to tree to tree within the orchard and causing additional damage. So in this module we've covered techniques to reduce wildlife damage on our crops. There are fact sheets for other species we haven't talked about and the ones we have talked about today in this module available on a couple websites. The Internet Center for Wildlife Damage Management is a national extension system resource. The University of Illinois Living with Wildlife in Illinois website includes species in Illinois that commonly cause conflicts with humans. And there is a link back to the Internet Center for Wildlife Damage Management I just mentioned. You can also find the Illinois Department of Natural Resources wildlife biologist that has responsibility for your county and a list of licensed wildlife nuisance trappers for hire on the Living with Wildlife in Illinois University of Illinois Extension website. There are many reasons nuisance wildlife management programs fail. Reasons include the use of only one management strategy, not a multiple integrated pest management strategy, not monitoring for the damage, anticipating damage that might be occurring. There's lack of alternate food sources available, so you've got treated areas and untreated, and maybe a lack of persistence by the landowner. Remember, you're going to have to be very persistent at changing the behavior of an animal, and you might just have been dealing with a very high population of problem animals. So any of these reasons or conditions or a combination of those might lead to lack of success in a wildlife nuisance management program. As we've said several times during the course of this module, managing nuisance wildlife populations is no different than managing other pests. You remember to use an integrated pest management approach. Use multiple strategies to reduce the damage caused on your crop by wildlife. Again, if you have any other questions, you can reach me at my email dshiley@illinois.edu. Good luck in your farming operation.